Welcome to episode 4 of my Superiority 2025 series. Last time I showed you the game which saw us qualify for the 8-team main event. There were a few more games after that one in the qualifier, and I do have some footage for those, but as they were just to decide seeding for the finals, my plan is to come back to those at a later time as bonus episodes. For now, we're jumping into round 1 of the finals where we met XTREM back on Japanese port again. The game's now a best of 9 format, so I'm going to make this more of a highlight style video in places and only show the full round if I think there was a decent one to show. Moving on to game 1, and we're running the same strategy as we did against 5 sticks on this map. I take the home cap and then climb up towards my team as they push for C. XTREM like to play against our strat a lot more aggressively than 5 sticks though. They're in general quite happy to push us into a brawl if they think they have an opening for it, trying to disrupt us basically. Like us, they like to run 2 grippins, unlike 5 sticks who would run 1 grippin and play a more conservative push over center map. It makes sense XTREM like to play this way, as of all the teams in their superiority they probably have some of the best duelists going. The theory is if it breaks down into a brawl they should be favoured. We are of course very aware of this, and what we want to happen is force them to push into us and get those nice top down missiles onto the grippins. As we all know, this could be a gamble for both sides though. Pushing grippins are taking the risk of eating some splash damage and perhaps dying, and we're taking the risk of them not taking said damage, and then, you know, people like me and Supreme up high in the Hornet and the SU have the issue of a griffin coming up from underneath us, and you're going to see how this plays out through the series. In this first round, for example, they didn't really contest us on C, so Sab is free to capture whilst Biscuit doubles back to wall off the D point. Zubo takes this bait and pushes into the D point, finding himself blocked by Biscuit, with me and Supreme getting top down launches from multiple aspects, which leads to him going down. However, whilst doing this, Sab is obviously looking to double back and get back to the team after capturing the C point using the island on the top part of the map, and you can actually follow this back and terrain mask a little bit, and he perhaps made a little bit of a positional error, as you'll see, as he decides to turn in over the island to try and engage them, perhaps thinking he needed to keep them off us a little bit more, but I don't, in hindsight I don't think it was necessary. As it is, he crosses over the island and he's forced to take a head-on with Caffey towards the enemy Hornets as well, and eventually a top-down AMRAM is going to splash him rear aspect as he looks to return to us. As a knock-on effect, Caffey now has a free path to push into Supreme, whilst he is also jousting with Holly, forcing him to give up a lot of altitude to maintain his energy with all this defending, which is the main disadvantage of the Hornet. It tends to lose its energy quite easily, so you end up having to cash in a lot more altitude than you maybe would have liked. Caffey takes a top-down crit from my 77 before taking a head-on with Supreme. Neither connects, but Biscuit's positioned himself nicely to clean up with a 9M. Biscuit and Supreme now have a theoretical 2v1 whilst I joust with Michael, but Holly absolutely nails this head-on, forcing the game into 2 1v1s. We'll now cut to the dogfight between Biscuit and Holly. Meanwhile, I'm basically just keeping Michael busy and preventing him from overturning our cap advantage. Holly looks to full commit in the merge. Given the Hornet loses to the Griffin 1v1, it makes sense to take more risk and try to end the fight early. Biscuit dodges and gets into the merge though. It's an interesting matchup despite the Griffin on paper winning this comfortably, because Holly is one of the best duelists in the whole tournament probably. However, Biscuit knows if he doesn't make a bad mistake here, he'll get the win. And once he dodges the guns on the first turn, it's a matter of time. Seeing this, Holly tries the button to no success, and now with no energy left, Biscuit simply loops over and takes the kill. Meanwhile, I had managed to extend from Michael in the hopes of turning their dogfight into a 2v1, knowing Michael is obliged to go for the D point to prevent the ticket loss. Of course, there's no need for this now, so I turn back in. I'm pushing Michael here carefully because I'm not totally sure what missiles he's got left. I don't think he did have any Fox 3s left at this point though, and just kind of reacting to what he does. There's no need for me to force anything. We have a massive ticket advantage and a 2v1, so I'll wait until I'm sure he's committing to Biscuit and take him out with a 73 once he shows me rear aspect. And that puts us 1-0 up at the start of this series. Round 2, and we're following the same setup as usual, but this time round they go for full disruption in the early game, so straight away I'm going to switch to Caffey's POV. This time round he plays super aggressive, pushing for head-ons and trying to disrupt Sab and Biscuit. Supreme is trying to get some top-down shots while I try to fend off anyone else from getting close. Caffey eventually gets taken out by Supreme after venturing above multipath height by mistake, but not before he takes out Biscuit in a pretty crazy head-on. Technically this is a 1-for-1 trade, but the issue is Supreme has again had to cash in a lot of altitude. Oh, and slight apologies, because there seem to be some audio issues capturing player POV and server replay, so sometimes the gun audio doesn't come through. So as Kaffy comes around here, pay attention to his altitude as he takes a shot. This is a common mistake that I and everyone makes when taking shots at multipath, accidentally picking up altitude, and this exposes him. Now we switch to Sab's POV as he pushes. He takes a full commit head-on trade with Holly. Now this isn't a good trade for us really, because that makes the end game a 2v2 with a flanker and Hornet for us versus a Hornet and Gripen for them. Now Holly is probably more happy to take this trade because we lose our Gripen for the endgame. Zubo has pushed our flank in their Gripen towards Supreme, who as I mentioned had to give up his altitude earlier in the game due to Kaffy's push. Also notice how Zubo fires at me to zone me out from helping Supreme, locking me into the joust with Michael. He will be aware that if he can isolate one of us in the dogfight and Michael simply doesn't die in the joust, then they have the game. And that's precisely what happens. Michael defends all my launches and gets to multipath to push a merge. Watching this back, my aggressive defense downwards was unnecessary. I feel I should have tried to hold my altitude a bit better to get the top down launches, as I still have plenty of 77s. As it is, I have to merge, but knowing even if I win Zubo will come over and finish me anyway, I try to extend away from it after to help Supreme, but of course Michael still has missiles left. I managed to flare flower the 9Ms and pull in to notch the AMRAMs, but he now has a free shot with the gun and Zubo shortly arrives to finish me off afterwards. Game 3 now, and this is a similar story to the last round. Me and Supreme are playing a lot more aggressively this time though. We know Kaffy is going to push in, so if we can keep the others off us and position well for a top down, we can get a 4v3 potentially, if we can take out Kaffy early. He manages to survive Supreme's launch but ends up right below me and doesn't get a chance to counterfire, giving me a dominant position not needing to defend. He tries to run but turns into the island, making it much harder to multipath, so he eats the 77. The slight issue is we can't really get away and consolidate our advantage after capping C like we did say in the first round. We may have the advantage, but the fight is kind of forced here. We have the numbers, but a couple of mistakes will soon turn that around. First up, Holly manages to clip Sab in a head-on. He's only crit, but this seriously affects his ability to fight effectively, and it gives Holly a very good position underneath us. This was following up from Zubo already having managed to slip past head-ons with Biscuit and Sab getting right underneath myself and Supreme. Now comes a painful error by myself. Since the previous update, smoke trails were changed a bit, and there's a particular issue with telling the data and 9M apart now. In a vacuum you can tell this quite easily. Looking back at the clip I can clearly see it's a data, but when the pressure is on you make mistakes. I mistook it for a 9M and that spells my end. Now we're just completely compromised. Zubo gets rear aspect on Biscuit and takes him out with a 9M, whilst Holly pushes up catching Supreme in a completely exposed position, also falling victim to a 9M. Now they just need to finish off Sab, still crit from earlier, and move 2-1 up in the match. At this point there were some technical issues with the tournament, meaning the next game got delayed, so we decided to alter strategy. Whilst we were having success getting early picks against their aggressive grip and push on C alone, we were finding that they seemed more comfortable with the brawl over the water that followed, so we decided to abandon our standard C push. Instead we decided to go for a full home cap push. There's less options for consistent multipath terrain doing this. Unless they full push the coast at the top of the map, they have to fight over land, which is much riskier to multipath and push a brawl. Theoretically meaning we can punish a push, or if they decide to maintain separation, we would feel like we have the upper hand there with how we play. Their response to this, as you'll see, was trying to wall off our push in front of their home cap with the 2 Hornets and a Gripen, whilst their second Gripen looks to flank around the volcano and box us in. We saw immediate success with this. First up, Supreme gets a couple of launches from up high down on Zubo, who was their Gripen trying to flank. He commits to multipath as defending normally would take too much time to pull off his flank, but the timing works out that the impact comes just as he transitions from the water, and level changes and inconsistent altitude are what make multipath the most inconsistent. He takes a hit and then he can't avoid the second, giving us a 4v3 already. This forced them passive, which I'd wager isn't their preferred playstyle. Knowing they can't be pushed effectively and there's no risk of a flank, Biscuit and Sab start to wrap around. Sab gets a nice lofted PL-12 to take out Caffey, who perhaps didn't realise it was lofted over the terrain. Supreme and Biscuit get launches from different angles and altitudes on Michael, who is now exposed due to the numerical and positional disadvantage they are in. He eats the data before being finished off by an AMRAM. And finally Holly is left with nothing to do ready, crashing, trying to multipath whilst I'm pressuring. Given we took a 4-0 win that round, it seemed natural to continue with the same strategy next round. This time Zubo pushed middle and Caffey and Michael went to the flank. On paper we were set up quite nicely here. The Gripens weren't able to multipath over the water, and I managed to force Holly's Hornet to give up altitude and go passive early with my ER pressure. This left Zubo very exposed on his own in the middle of our team. I am able to force a kill with the ER, but not before he manages to take out Sab in a snapshot head on, making it a 1-for-1 trade. Whilst this was going on, Supreme was holding Caffey off from pushing our rear, and he gets a very nice AMRAM off, firing it on track memory, lofting it upwards as he goes behind the hill, so I think Caffey had limited RWR warnings for this one. He doesn't react in time, and we got ourselves a 3v2 with both their Gripens dead. But sadly now it all kind of falls apart. Supreme and Biscuit get taken out in very quick succession. First up, Supreme fails to respect the IOG of a top-down AMRAM. Always important to remember, top-down missiles typically never bite on chaff, so if you recommit at the wrong time, it'll recapture you and take you out. Biscuit gets caught between 2 launches from their Hornets, and in his defense he fails a notch from Michael. If we look at the sensor view, you'll see he only notched it very briefly at the start. It doesn't bite on the chaff though, and reconnects on his tail as he's no longer in the notch angle. This leaves me in a 2v1 with nowhere to run, and the result is somewhat inevitable now. Round 6 and we concluded there was no reason to change strategy after that, recognising that it was actually winning us that round, the loss coming from individual errors, which is often the case. If you watch your replays back, I'd wager as long as you have a cohesive strategy that everyone is following, losses usually come down to someone making a poor decision or a mistaken execution. I don't think it's as common for your issue to be purely down to the strategy you are running. And those mistakes in execution saw our swift downfall here as well. First, Biscuit gets caught out by Zubo on his right, not quite getting to multipath in time, ourselves falling victim to the multipathing over the land being tricky here at the best of times. Now it's my turn. Whilst I pull off a nice notch to a missile from my low left from Zubo, I fail to pull into the notch for an easy AMRAM fired by Holly. It was very notchable, I just had to pull round further. You can see how obvious it was in sensor view. Honestly can't remember how I missed this one. I'd wager maybe our mental was starting to fade at this point, the pressure getting to us a bit. Shortly after we lose Supreme, once again caught out by the IOG, he notches this AMRAM ahead of him successfully, but as it switched to IOG and is still far enough that he remains in the field of view after an altitude change and recommit, it recaptures him and takes him out. Finally, I couldn't resist putting this edit in for Sab at the end. For context, Kafi, Zuba and Michael are all Czech players and Sab is Serbian, and if you know anything about Slavic countries, you'll know they love joking with each other about this stuff. With that, this match is on the cusp now at 4-2 to XTREM. One more round and they'll be through in the winners bracket. It is double elimination like the qualifiers, so this wouldn't be the end for us, but it's certainly rough on the morale. And I'd like to tell you that we pulled off an epic comeback this match, but the errors didn't go away along with some slight misfortune. The first error is my own positioning. We didn't want them to be able to execute a coast push and get close to us, so I shouldn't really be out this wide at the start. Thing is, I hadn't realised Zubo's Gripen was in this direction. I thought I was keeping a Hornet pressured and pushing a 1v1, which is an ideal scenario for me here. Instead, I need to dive out to multipath as Zubo shows up and go cold so I don't die. Whilst I do live, I've given up my altitude very early, which kills all my potential top-down 77 and ER pressure and the whole reason I run the flanker in our comp. It also means Supreme and Sab are forced to try and cover me, messing up their positioning too. It would still be salvageable though, if not for some misfortune. Win swapped in for Biscuit this round and he's looking to fend off Kafi trying to take our flank. Supreme gets a top down launch for Kafi to assist, but the missile locks onto Win's tail very late and instead we get a nasty team kill. The knock-on effect of this is Kafi is now free to push a flank, which happens to be right into where I was running cold. I don't have the altitude to top down him due to my positioning mistake earlier, so I'm forced into the merge. If I pull into the merge, the Gripen just kills me, so I try and extend. I flare flower the first 9M and start pulling in case I need to notch, but then the second 9M comes out and flaring a 9M side aspect in the flanker this close is always tricky. Then Supreme and Sab do what they can, but they're outnumbered at the end of the day. We did manage to take out Michael's Hornet, but Zubo gets guns on Supreme before Sab tanks a rear aspect multipath hit, and that sees us lose the match 5-2. This put XTREM through to face Voyager in the next round of the winners bracket, Voyager having won the first round as well. The loser of that match, AVRES, will be who we're facing in the losers bracket next time round for a rematch after we met them during the qualifier. Both teams now having their tournament life on the line, so the stakes are as high as ever.